And rely.
1897, the work was called Suicide. And he was talking about the alienation that people had in 19th century bourgeois society. The fact that even though people feel liberated and they have more freedoms and they have more access to material goods, that they've broken down the traditional bonds that kind of sustain them, and that in absence of all of those bonds, that people started to feel so isolated that they killed themselves. And that was like a social or sociological happening at the end of the 19th century that Durkheim was talking about. And then the second part of it was that Durkheim was saying that that alienation, that vulnerability can easily be manipulated by some of those cultish figures that would come along. Okay? So the third essay then is culture as a reflection of the time period. And so the essay could have architecture in it, it could have art, you know, like painting and that type of thing. It could have literature, and it could have music. And everything except for architecture really kind of fits this narrative that we've been in with this age of anxiety. Okay? So literature is the first thing that we're kind of discussing here. And like I said, you can break it into different pieces. And where I had gotten to is that 19th century novelists, you kind of got it. There's characters, there's plot lines. It's very easy to kind of follow the arc, even though the stories may be kind of tough to listen to, like a family getting ripped apart by the Russian invasion in 1812 by Napoleon or something like that, or the life of some, you know, prostitute trying to make her way through the streets of Paris. Those are all sucky, like, themes, but at least they're themes that everybody can kind of get their heads around. And then in the 20th century, it says, most major writers adopted the limited, often confused viewpoint of a single individual. Like Freud, these novelists focus their attention on the complexity and irrationality of the human mind, where feelings, memories, and desires are forever scrambled. So whatever your dialogue might be, let's just say you're walking along the sidewalk or something like that, or maybe you're walking down the street and then you see a tree. It's not like Chris Pierce is walking down the sidewalk. He sees a tree, period. That's a crappy novel. Okay? In the 20th century, though, it gets into Chris's head, and he might be like, oh, tree, that reminds me that I left something on the stove. Okay? Or stovetop stuffing, isn't that shitty? You know? Like, why does it have to be the San Francisco treat? No, that's rice-a-roni. What am I thinking? Okay? And then all of this is being typed up by the novelist. Do you understand? So then the novel itself becomes like this fractured array of different impressions. It could be in the setting, it could be in his internal like monologue, it could be somebody else's internal monologue, but it makes for a really, really deep novel where there's a hell of a character study going on. But it's also very difficult to read because you don't know if you're in the 1920s, you don't know if you're in the 1850s, you don't know maybe if that character is talking or somebody's talking to him or her. It's really kind of like trippy, some of this stuff. So Marcel Proust was the first guy that was mentioned there, and if anybody's ever seen Little Miss Sunshine, you might know something about Marcel Proust, because he came up in that movie, which was kind of cool. But his work is called Remembrance of Things Past, and he basically like locked himself away for about 10 years in France to start thinking about like all of his old experiences and to be able to put them down in paper. It's like he dropped out of society in order to be able to do it. So this is what it says, just on the kind of the aside. Writers like Proust embraced psychological relativity, the attempt to understand oneself by looking at one's past. Okay? They said this is a lengthy masterpiece that provides a reflection of society that turned in 20th century France, but its perception of reality is wholly internal. Its central theme is the role of memory in retrieving past experience and in shaping the private life of the individual. Proust's mission was to rediscover a sense of the past by reviving sensory experiences buried deep within his psyche. It's almost like he's doing Freud on himself, all right, in order to try to retrieve this. But this is a whole movement that goes on, and it's not just Proust, but it's also Virginia Woolf. Franz Kafka employed those techniques, James Joyce employed those techniques, and that's what they call the stream of consciousness novel, where they're kind of bouncing around from one thing to the next. Right? But some of the at least what are regarded as the richest or the most important 20th century novels tended to come out of this era. It says Proust, along with Woolf, Kafka, and Joyce, were greatly influenced by Freudian psychology. In Proust's work, like the aforementioned novelists, the most significant events are those that take place in the psychic life of dreams and memory. The narrative line of the story may be interrupted by expected leaps of thought or unexpected leaps of thought, intrusive recollections, self-reflections, and sudden dead ends. And I'm going to read a portion of James Joyce to you so you can see how freaking ridiculous it is. Okay? Fantasy may alternate freely with rational thought. The lives of heroes, or more exactly anti-heroes in these stories, are often inconsequential, while their concerns, though commonplace or trivial, may be obsessive, bizarre, and charged with passion. Has anybody ever heard of Franz Kafka or read Metamorphosis or any of those? When you talk about a Kafka nightmare, it's like one of those things where, you know, the one that they talk about is where he wakes up and he's a cockroach or he's a beetle. And then he's like staring at the world through the eyes of a beetle, and everybody's kind of staring at him. If anybody's ever seen like really, really good Stanley Kubrick movies, like A Clockwork Orange or something like that, that's like Kafka. All right? You know, where the guy has like, you know, these like metal pliers that are holding up his eyelids, so that he gets to stare at like horrifying images for like 2 days straight, you know? Or it would be like somebody that's going through those roundabouts, those things that you have to get through to get onto the subway, but they keep going into it, and then they keep coming back out of it, and then they keep going into it and coming back out of it, and every once in a while they go, ah! That's Kafka, okay? That's what it talks about. It says, Kafka viewed the subconscious as giving conscious experience a bizarre and threatening twist. Written in the German language, Kafka's novels and short stories take on the reality of dreams in which characters are nameless, details are precise but grotesque, and events lack logical consistency. Kafka's novels create a nightmarish world in which central characters become victims of unknown or imprecisely understood forces. They may be caught in absurd but commonplace circumstances involving guilt and frustration, or they may be threatened by menacing events that appear to have neither meaning nor purpose. If you've ever seen the movie Marathon Man, has anybody ever seen that? It's from the 70s, all right? And Dustin Hoffman is like this graduate student. He's always running, you know, so it makes it look like he's training for a marathon. But like the central theme is where he just gets captured. And I guess his brother was like involved in some kind of weird diamond smuggling, but he had no idea what the hell it was about. But all of a sudden, like, he just gets mugged on the street. And they bring him into this like concrete enclosed room with one of those hanging lights. And then all of a sudden, Laurence Olivier shows up, and he's got this lab coat on, and he starts preparing him for dentistry. And so the idea is that this guy is a dentist, but it turns out he was a Nazi dentist. And the only thing that he says to him, to Hoffman, is it safe? And Dustin Hoffman is like, what is what safe? I don't understand. What are you talking about? And then he takes the drill and he starts drilling into the nerves of his teeth. I'm scared. And he's like, is it safe? Dustin Hoffman, like, is what safe? I don't know what you want me to say. Is it safe? That's Kafka. Okay? That's a Kafka novel. Damn. Metamorphosis, the trial. Basically, the trial is where somebody gets arrested, convicted, and ultimately sentenced, and they don't even know what the hell happened. And that's kind of like, I guess if you think about it, that's sensibility in the age of anxiety. It's like the whole of Europe was kind of like in that situation where they just got like hit by a truck and they don't know why. There's no answers for them. And I think that's kind of why the novels are playing the way that they do. But it says the themes of insecurity and vulnerability recur in Kafka's novels and reflect the mood that prevailed during the early decades of the century. James Joyce, masterclass, just psychotic thing. But his most famous book is called Ulysses. And it's supposed to be like this weird irony where they follow this guy. He's just like a regular guy. And he's going, kind of takes him through his day in Dublin. And supposedly it's like counterweighted with like Ulysses, what is it, the Odyssey, returning back from battle, and comparing like the mundane with the heroic. So there's like this weird sort of relationship there. But here is just one photo, one like morsel of trying to read Joyce's Ulysses. So here's what it says. He crossed to the bright side, avoiding the loose cellar flap of number 75. The sun was nearing the steeple of George's church. Be a warm day, I fancy, especially in these black clothes, feel it more. Black conducts, reflects, refracts, is it? The heat. But I couldn't go in that light suit. Make a picnic of it. His Boland's bread van delivering with our trays our daily, but she prefers yesterday's loaves, turnovers, crisp crowns hot. Makes you feel young. Somewhere in the east. Early morning, set off at dawn. Travel around in front of the sun. Steal a day's march on him. Who? Keep it up forever, never grow a day older, technically. Wander around all day. Meet a robber or two. Well, meet him. Getting on to sundown, the shadows of the mosque along the pillars. Priest with a scroll rolled up. A shiver of the trees signal the evening wind. I pass on, fading gold sky. A mother watches from her doorway. She calls her children home in their dark language. High wall. Beyond strings twanged, night sky moon, violet, color of Molly's new garters. Strings, listen, a girl playing one of those instruments. What do you call them, dulcimers? I pass. It's 1,000 pages of that.
What did he read?
Well, I think he was going home, and that's just kind of like, he saw some stuff. Maybe it was something in a shop window, but it's wherever his head was. It's like those people that they drive with you, and then they start like saying the names of all of the things that they pass. Like you're going down East Colonial, and it's like Wendy's, Thai Hut, Subway. It's like, yes, I get it. There's restaurants. Some people do that. Crazy, but that's their way. They have to articulate what they're thinking.
How could you do that?
Obviously, they weren't thinking much.
How could you do that for 1,000 pages?
Good question. Joyce was crazy. So Virginia Woolf is in there, William Faulkner. William Faulkner's work is called The Sound and the Fury, which they said is sort of like a grand narrative that is told in the mind of someone that is not really that mentally there. So I guess the best example would be like Forrest Gump, where these amazing events happen, but it's kind of like the monologue is told through the eyes of, Forrest Gump. So, all right, the next group is even better. They're called the anti-utopian impending doom predictors.
Oh, Troy.
Yes. So the first guy on the list is Oswald Spengler, and his work is called The Decline of the West. And basically all he's trying to say is that the Western civilization, which you might have said, began its origins with Greece and Rome, and then kind of reached its apex, maybe with England in the 18th or early 19th century, was now dying. And that eventually, the West itself was approaching its death and would be ultimately replaced by Eastern civilization. That was his experience. That, everything kind of goes through a life cycle and grows and matures and dies, and he's looking at Western civilization as being that thing that is dying. T.S. Eliot, one of his most famous poems is called The Wasteland, and you could look at Belgium or northeastern France and probably say that. But the language that is utilized is very, very kind of specific to that sort of idea. And the wasteland itself was either people or the wasteland was something geographical, but it's probably one of the more famous poems from that period. Kafka, I mentioned, he's kind of an impending doom predictor. The idea that helpless people are crushed by inexplicable forces, and a lot of people were like that. Kafka's novels are kind of prefiguring, just what it must have felt like to be an Eastern European Jew between 1932 or 9 and maybe 42, where all of a sudden you're told to register, and then all of a sudden you're told you have to move, then all of a sudden you find yourself in a ghetto, and then all of a sudden you're moving on a train, and nobody's telling you jack about what's happening. Just that the circumstances get increasingly nightmarish as you go along. So maybe there's a little bit of like foreboding on some of this stuff. George Orwell, I think most people have heard of. 1984 is the most famous of these. He's a very, very stark commentary on what totalitarian society was, particularly the Soviet Union. Animal Farm, which I think everybody in 7th grade read or something like that. But obviously 1984, which is the kind of novel depicting what a modern totalitarian society is. And this is what it says: Big Brother, the dictator, and his totalitarian state use a new kind of language, sophisticated technology, psychological terror to strip a weak individual of his last shred of dignity. The supremely self-confident chief of the thought police tells the tortured, broken, and framed Winston Smith, if you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stomping on a human face forever. Isn't that lovely? So, if you've ever, there's other novels that kind of fall into that category of this sort of like technocratic control of everybody's hearts and minds. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, Pink Floyd, if you've ever seen The Wall, which is a very strange movie. And then there's some period pieces. For anti-World War I Nazi era and World War II treats, see one of the following. Most of these we've talked about, but they're very specific novels to how just absolutely degrading and devastating World War I was. There's a writer by the name of Siegfried Sassoon that is not in the reading, but was a very powerful kind of first-hand accounts. I believe that he was, I'm not sure if he was a poet, but for World War I and the battlefield and all of that, he was certainly one of the more notable writers. Wilfred Owen was the British version of Siegfried Sassoon that was in combat, but also kind of gave us an idea of how destructive the Western Front was. Ernest Hemingway, which is part of that group called the Lost Generation, was one of the American writers, but a lot of what affected him was the time that he spent in World War I. And then the most famous of the World War I novels is Eric Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front. I think I described that to you guys when we were talking about World War I and how there was like this sort of optimism about how the war started, and then just kind of watches the decay of these poor people that had to participate in that war. The Grapes of Wrath, obviously, for the Great Depression, that's about as close as, we call it social realism. I mean, there's a lot of different genres in this period, but that one is kind of like, at least putting its finger on the pulse of what the Dust Bowl was in the United States. And then there's a handful of others here from World War II. One was called From Here to Eternity, Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead, and Joseph Heller, which I always thought would have been really good, like interp stuff. It's called Catch-22. It's very dark and very satirical. It's kind of like Dr. Strangelove, if you've ever seen a Stanley Kubrick movie. But I always love the end of this, where it says, Heller based the events of Catch-22 on his own experiences as an Air Force bombardier in World War II. The novel takes place off an air base off the coast of Italy, but its plot is less concerned with the events of the war than the dehumanizing operations of the vast military bureaucracy that runs the war. Heller describes this bureaucracy as symbolic of the humbug, hypocrisy, cruelty, and sheer stupidity of our mass society. His rendering of the classic Armed Forces condolence letter is part of that satire. And if you look at it, it just shows how pathetic and depersonalized the whole thing was. That you had a form letter to inform somebody that they died, or that their son, so they say, Dear Mrs., Mr., Miss, or Mr. and Mrs. blank. Words cannot express the deep personal grief I experienced when your husband, son, father, or brother was killed, wounded, or reported missing in action. That's cool. Good to know. What if you circled the wrong boxes? But I didn't have any brothers in World War II. Oh, you got the wrong memo. My bad. Let me change that. I think there was something like that in that movie with Tom Hanks. What is it? The Spielberg one. Saving Private Ryan. There was something about those condolences and how George Marshall always quoted Abraham Lincoln, you know, when he sent out a condolence letter. The Holocaust, there's a couple. One is Elie Wiesel's Night. The other is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is not only an account of what it was like as a survivor, but also kind of an ode to existentialism, that even in the worst circumstances in the world, which are the Holocaust, how an individual could not be robbed of how they were going to go through their life. Okay? That they could still hold on to the way that they were going to confront their own experiences. That couldn't be taken away from them. All right. Let's move on to architecture. And I'm gonna fire up this very, very primitive machine called an interactive laser disc player. But you can follow along if you want on your iPads with this thing called AP European Chapter 28, Modernism in the Arts. Okay? And all these numbers represent the things that we're going to be looking at on the laser disc. So bear with me on this. Just want to make sure that I get it squared away. Video. And play. This is like an 8-track tape version of technology.
Is that the remote?
This is the remote. Looks like a 1980s cell phone, doesn't it?
It's like my...
That looks like a calculator.
So the first thing that we're going to look at is architecture. There's a really good section in your textbook about this.
Can you turn out the lights so it
Yeah,
puts it on the camera?
Modernism in the arts, right?
Right. But on page 861 of McKay, there's a section called Modernism in Architecture, Art, and Music. And the architecture section is actually pretty good. It seems to be the one thing that is not like everything else. Everything else is moving into this abstract, sort of representing the trivial, irrational, psychotic break that Europe seems to be having in the age of anxiety. Modernism in architecture seems normal. And the style that they took on was this thing called functionalism. So I'm going to try to show you, as best I can, some of these things. Okay? So what do you see?
An office building.
This is from the 1920s, though.
What?
Is that surprising?
Yes.
All right. And the reason why is because this was a style that was, I guess, maybe spearheaded in Germany and eventually came to the United States. But it was based on the idea that form follows function. So glass, concrete, and steel were utilized as these mass-produced products. And the idea was that the building itself needed to fit or fulfill the function of what the building was. So instead of all of the ornate stuff that you saw from like Gothic architecture or neoclassical architecture, these guys wanted to create clean lines, straight lines, using mass-produced materials, and to be able to occupy enclosed spaces so that you could fit those spaces with about as much as you could possibly get out of that building. So if you've ever seen a downtown and you've seen skyscrapers, or if you have parking garages that are like the underbelly of residential buildings, or you've seen parking garages, or you've seen restaurants, or you've seen picnic areas, and then you've seen residences, or you've seen businesses that the top half is residences, the lower half is businesses, because in a crowded downtown, you have very little real estate to work with. And the idea of building these grandiose sort of things didn't make a whole lot of sense. So in a period of really the lack of sense, because everybody's so like psychotic and like damaged by World War I and everything else, architecture seemed pretty normal, pretty practical, really. And that's kind of what functionalism is. So if you look in your notes, you'll read about a handful of people. One of them was this Chicago school architect by the name of Louis H. Sullivan. And then there was a handful of people in Germany. One's name was Walter Gropius. The other was Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Okay? And they formed this organization called the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus was a school. It was an architectural school in Weimar, Germany. Weimar is the period of governance between 1919 and 1933. Okay? It says the Bauhaus brought together many leading modern architects, designers, and theatrical innovators. Working as an effective, inspired team, they combined the study of fine art, including painting and sculpture, with the study of applied art in the crafts of printing, weaving, and furniture making. Throughout the 1920s, the Bauhaus, with its stress on functionalism and good design for everyday life, attracted enthusiastic students from all over the world. So here's just a couple of examples of, I guess, more of the Bauhaus here. But, oops. All right. It looks like, something you'd see in Altamont Springs, doesn't it? It's just like an office complex, or if you've ever been out to like Northern California, places like off in near San Francisco, where all the Silicon Valley stuff is. They employ these designs. Okay, some of it was to allow for some nature. They wanted the buildings to kind of blend in with the natural surroundings, but they were also trying to make sure that they could take advantage of enclosed spaces. All right, and you don't see anything grandiose here. There's no freaking like lions with like swans flying above their heads. There isn't any of that weird Gothic, with steeples and buttresses and everything else. It's just four walls, basically. A bunch of glass, a bunch of steel, a bunch of concrete. And that's kind of what they were going for. That's sort of Gothic. Not really, though.
It's like they tried to copy Gothic and didn't...
And it didn't really work out. Or if you've ever been to Lakeshore Drive, a lot of the stuff they did along Lakeshore Drive was very much of this idea called functionalism. Okay? There's Le Corbusier. And you see how even the interiors, how they try to almost blend in with whatever the natural surroundings are. The person that really did that the best was Frank Lloyd Wright. If you've ever seen, some of the houses in northern Illinois, they kind of employ that design where they'll blend in with the wooded areas that are in the surroundings. I mean, that's a church. Looks kind of industrial, doesn't it?
Industrial church.
Industrial church. It's Rockefeller Center, home of SNL. Let me see if I can find it. Oh yeah. More Le Corbusier. They were even looking at grain elevators as inspirations. How could that possibly be inspirational? A grain elevator. They were like, oh, that would be a cool apartment complex. Okay. I don't know if I have any. What I need open here is the. On your sheet, does anybody have the other thing open? What is it? Oh, there it is. I wanted to see if the Frank Lloyd Wrights were in here somewhere. But apparently they are not. Oh yeah, here they are. I'm sorry. I don't have Falling Waterhouse, which is one of the more famous ones, but if anybody's ever seen the residences for Frank Lloyd Wright, like I said, you can see how they sort of blend in with the natural surroundings. The more famous one is called Falling Waterhouse, and that's in Pennsylvania.
Oh, that's cool.
Isn't that cool? It's very modern looking though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like whole feng shui type thing.
Feng shui?
Yeah, it's got like waterfalls and everything.
Okay, so that's functionalism. All right, and in the 1920s and 30s, that really is the movement. The Bauhaus is specific as being a school for functionalist architects. There is like Walter Sullivan and Louis H. Sullivan, who started what's called the Chicago School for Architects. And a lot of the skyscrapers in Chicago and New York and a lot of the residential stuff was kind of, fashioned out of this idea called form follows function. All right? So modernism in the arts. And what I've done is I've broken them into their little subcategories, but all of it kind of functionally is modernism. The first part here is Impressionism. Impressionism arrives on the scene probably in the mid-1860s and into the early 1870s. And this is the first big art movement after realism. And why did realism go away? I think we talked about that.
Because the truth hurts and World War I.
Because of photography.
Oh.
The advent of photography. So painting things in objective detail didn't really seem to make that much sense anymore. All right. So they moved away from it. And the first movement is predominantly a French movement, but let's look at a couple of the paintings here. 7516. Unless it's 70. There we go. There's Edward Manet. Manet is kind of a bridge. And a lot of his paintings were regarded as realist, and then he started to move into this genre called Impressionism. Can you see in the background, like the people behind the mirror? That's really what the focal point is here. This woman is a barmaid or something to that extent. She's probably working at one of those uppity bourgeois weddings or balls or something like that, and she's staring out at the audience. Yeah.
What's the name of this?
A bar at the Folies Bergère. And what's great about the Impressionists, you can get a real sense of what fashion was like in the 1870s and 80s, kind of how people lived their lives, what the bourgeoisie looked like, the dinner parties, and all of those other things. Okay, some of this is very, very much Impressionist. You can kind of look here. This is the 1870s. So certainly you can see. Does everybody understand what Impressionism is? It's the idea where your eyes are sort of distorted. So the only things that you're really catching are color and light and things like that. So it's almost like there's a distortion, like before your eyes finally focus on something, as if you were just turning and there's sort of a blur. And the focus is obviously, it's moving a little bit more than just like the objective detail of things, and it's starting to paint mood. It's starting to paint colors, the use of colors, landscapes, and things like that are appealing more to sentiment or to feeling than they are necessarily just, hey, this is a dude holding a banana. And it's called Dude Holding a Banana. What did the artist try to accomplish with this painting? He saw a guy with a banana and he painted it. Genius. I did show you, what was the other Manet that I showed you? It's called Déjeuner sur l'herbe. Have you guys seen that one before, Luncheon in the Grass? That was also his. It's on the wall behind you, but I don't know if I have that one. Let's see. This was actually the cover of a European history textbook not too long ago. This painting. Alright? So you can see, mostly 1870s. It's not, I don't want to ask you to remember all the names of these. That picture right there was on the cover of one of the McKay textbooks not too long ago. Okay? So people voting. A lot of French people having fun. But he's showing you the brush strokes. As you get closer to the canvas, you can barely make out anything. And then as you step further away, you can kind of make out the scene. All right, so that's Manet. A lot of paintings of the bourgeoisie. This is probably the most famous of the Manets besides the Luncheon and the Grass one. But that was a lot earlier. You can see, like even in the mirror, how you can barely make out the images. All right, Pissarro, who's the next one that's on this list here. It's a lot of Impressionist paintings of sunsets, a lot of landscapes, things like that. This is in the Virgin Islands. Not much to it. But who's the most famous of the Impressionist painters that did mostly landscapes? Monet. Okay, so we'll look at Monet next. Monet is 86. Okay. I think he probably painted like 4 or 5 paintings a day because they seem to be everywhere. Any place you go in the United States, you can find Monets. Obviously, they're all over the place in France. I think he painted every part of France. Like whatever there was, he painted it. Not people as much as like boulevards or water or sunrises or sunsets or mountains. This is just to show you how wide the boulevards were after the Reconstruction, and to show you like how many people would be out and about in the central parks in Paris. And you can't really make out anything, can you? Pretty impressive, though. And he used every color that you could imagine. So this one is showing, I guess, some of the stuff from the Industrial Revolution, the railroads and the steam kind of rising from the railroads. There's a lot. This one, he barely used half of the canvas. Like the canvas was part of the color that he was using for it. So it was supposed to show like a fog coming in the morning and the seagulls. Alright, so there's Monet. I don't think any of the water lily stuff is in here, unfortunately. So, one of the American painters, actually, her name is Mary Cassatt. She spent most of her time in France. But she was an American Impressionist painter. There's just a couple from her. Pretty good looking art though, isn't it? I guess this is a girl arranging her hair.
That's the title.
Which is called Girl Arranging Her Hair. Alright. Monet we just did. Renoir, who's my personal favorite. Got about 3 or 4 prints in my house. Not the originals. They tend to be a little bit expensive. He did landscapes, but he also did a lot of just like portraits of the bourgeoisie. Really dark tanned French women, like this one. There's Renoir. Looks like a happy guy. That's his eyeball.
I'm sure the people at home will love to see that.
Let's do it again then. Renoir's eyeball. Renoir is staring at you. There's a couple that are pretty famous. One's called the Voting Party Luncheon. We'll get to those. Yeah, there's a lot of lunches. I think most people have seen this painting before, but this is probably his most famous. And then he's got one that shows, like this was the bourgeoisie, kind of their typical dinner party thing. Lots of wine. Lots of women in song.
Girl with the fan.
Girl with a fan, yeah.
Guess what the subject is?
Phoebe Cates from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right there. Child with a whip. That's. She seems so peaceful. Who knew? All right. There was another Renoir that I must have missed it, but it was kind of like the opposite of the voting party luncheon. That was showing the working class on the other side. Or maybe that's Seurat. I think it is Seurat, so I'll get to that. All right, Edgar Degas. What is Degas famous for? Ballerinas, that's the correct answer. You see a painting on a Euro test of a ballerina? It is Degas. Either that or someone really, really drunk on absinthe, which is this woman. This is like a public service announcement, isn't it? Do not drink absinthe. It will turn you into a brooding alcoholic. Cabaret. Got to get to our ballerina pictures. Or the circus. Mary Cassatt. There's a woman ironing. There we go. That's more the style. The other thing is the colors. There's a lot of like these pastelish type of colors, greens and blues and that type of thing. And it looks like it's even more modern. Like the Impressionism itself seems to be pushing towards what they call Post-Impressionism. Here's Mary Cassatt playing some cards. No absinthe, but she might as well be drinking now. Alright, there's some more dancers. But you see the pastels, the one that I was talking about? Pinks and light greens and blues. So they got. Okay, well that pretty much covers that. And then the next section, which starts really in the 1880s and kind of in the 1890s, is kind of pushing further and further towards the abstract. You can still make out the objects, but it seems to be going in a different direction where it's more mood or color or something else that's being painted. And some of the most famous painters come from this period, which is called, once again, Post-Impressionism. The first guy is the most famous of the Post-Impressionists, and clearly the most sane of all of the painters, Vincent van Gogh.
Go here.
You can kind of, you can pick out a Van Gogh because of the brush strokes. It almost looks like he's using like a comb or something to put out the paint on the canvas. As you get closer, it looks very rigid. He did a lot of paintings of sunflowers. He also did a lot of paintings of himself. So if you see like an old bearded Dutch dude, it's probably a Van Gogh. But sunflowers, there's one called the Starry Night, if you've ever seen it. There's Benny. I don't know if his ear's gone in this picture or not.
It was his other ear, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, his ear's pretty red there. He did a lot of, like, I guess, agrarian scenes. Farmers or farmhouses or haystacks or things like that. I think this is the point where he's starting to lose it a little bit. So more sunflowers.
So many sunflowers.
But you can see how, how much different a realist painting is from this. It's literally just kind of gone overboard, with the colors especially.
Some people are clearly excited for
Somebody
art.
scored. Bushes, which of course is a rendering of bushes. Wheat field.
And Cypress Street.
This is very, you see like the swirls though in the sky as well as the haystacks or the wheat fields. That's another like kind of signature Van Gogh kind of thing. Alright. The next guy that's on the list is Paul Cezanne. And I guess what you could say about him is fruit. If you can remember fruit, you're pretty good on Paul Cezanne. He did a lot of work on still lifes.
I'm just going to put the word fruit emboldened on the screen.
Yeah, just write fruit, that'll be good. I mean, he did some other stuff. But mostly it was still lifes. Okay, which means he painted fruit or he painted flowers or vases or whatever the case may be. But a very classic, besides his clear emulation of Karl Marx. He looks like a food critic, doesn't he? Like a Northern California food critic.
Oh yeah.
That's the thumbnail, right?
That's more the style.
That was going to be the thumbnail.
It's kind of geometrical. It's very, very kind of focused on color. But the still lifes, if you can see a still life, good guess it's a Cezanne.
Will there be a lot of paintings on the board?
Huh?
Will there be?
I would bet there's probably 3 or 4. But they're not going to try to fool you. Alright, they're generally things that you should know what that painting is, or you could be able to identify it with a movement. We're certainly going into a lot more detail than they would for the board exam. But so that's Cezanne. This guy, I think everybody has seen, but probably doesn't know who it is. His name is George Seurat. All right, and Sunday Afternoon at La Grande Jatte. And he's like his own. It's called Post-Impressionism, but it's like a sub-movement called Pointillism, which is a brushstroke where it's just like very, very finely tuned dots. And you, the closer you get to it, you can just look. It's one dot after the other, and then when you step away, you can see the details of it. But I think this is the one that I was referring to. This seems to be like the rich side of the river. Yeah.
Will we need to know if the names of these paintings would attach?
No.
Okay.
Probably not.
Okay.
They usually would give you the title, but
Oh, I was talking about like your test.
on my test,
Yeah.
maybe. I'll have to look. I doubt it.
Dun, dun, dun.
There might be a few like impossible questions. Like all of the following are post-impressionist painters except.
Right. Every time I watch her stuff,
We have like a picture of a girl coming her hand and be like, what is the title of this painting?
Right.
And we have that.
Girl with a fan.
Yeah, what is it, girl?
I mean, you got a monkey chasing a little dog. That's a pretty
That is
interesting detail.
art right there.
All right. So yeah, the theme is called Pointillism. And that was his own technique, and he had people that followed it or whatever.
It looks pointless.
It's like when you look.
Oh, this is the other side of the river, which always reminded me of Caddyshack, because there's a period in that movie where like all the country club people have to leave because there's 15 minutes where the caddies are allowed to swim. So like all of the lower class kids just start piling into the pool, and that's these guys on the other side of the river. So it's like he's painting both sides of the river, one's where the wealthy folk get to hang out, and the monkeys, of course. Where. So anyway, okay. So Paul Gauguin was the last one, and I think Paul Gauguin was the one that had to spend time with Van Gogh before Van Gogh went psycho, and he got so disillusioned by his relationship or whatever that he left and went to Tahiti. So if you see any pictures of Tahitian women, Gauguin is your guy. All right? So Cezanne, fruit. Van Gogh, sunflowers or himself. Seurat, just remember the Sunday Afternoon at La Grande Jatte thing. And Gauguin, pictures of Tahitian women. Okay, very colorful, very tropical, but that's generally what he did. He painted a lot of Tahitian women. who apparently had these weird sexual appetites. So when James Cook or whoever it was, or is it James Cook, the British explorer?
I think it was Cook.
When they eventually settled in that region, apparently they thought nails, like nails from the boat, were supposedly like some kind of luxurious item. So the British guys figured that if they started like bringing nails to these women, they could trade them for sexual favors. And so they had these British guys that were like jumping all over the ship, like pulling boards out of the ship, trying to get to the nails, so that they could get back on shore to hang out with some of these gals here.
Well, I guess they wouldn't care if they didn't get home.
So they ran out of nails.
Yeah.
You can't exactly take your entire ship apart.
That's a different take on Gilligan's Island, isn't it, though? Alright. So he also did some still life, but I wouldn't concern myself as much with that as the Tahitian women, because that's where he spent most of his time there. Okay. This is like a separate thing, but is more into the 20th century now, and it's called Fauvism, which was its own movement. And the painter is a guy by the name of Henri Matisse. And further abstract. This one is going in a direction where it doesn't matter what is painted as much as the colors that are utilized in the paintings. Okay? So this one, and don't, like I said, Simran, don't worry so much about the titles of the works. Alright? Well, this one's pretty famous. Okay? And you can see, it's almost like, because Matisse and Picasso had this thing, you know, where, like, there's a period of Picasso where he's trying to emulate Matisse, and there's a period of Matisse where he's trying to emulate Picasso. So Picasso obviously is famous for Cubism, which is like his own thing, and Matisse is famous for Fauvism, which is his own thing, but they kind of were like, I don't know, like Brian Wilson and Paul McCartney and John Lennon, where they were constantly trying to one-up each other in the art world. And so you can see Matisse's influence in Picasso, you can also see vice versa. But this one's called Harmony in Red. And can you see, like, the profile? That's a very kind of, it's very Picasso-esque, where it looks like the dimensions aren't quite right, that it's more geometric. This one's it's in MoMA, if anybody's ever been to Museum of Modern Art in New York. They have this one.
Nice.
But can you see the Cubism though, the influence? Okay. And obviously this one looks a little bit more impressionistic, but it's the colors that matter to them. They were just these very wild colors. And this one, for God's sake, I mean, this is, I am totally going to be Picasso today. So, yes. What is it called? Large reclining nude. But as he moves further into his career, he seems to get a little bit more into the Cubism, because I guess that's what was selling at the time. Then he kind of went back to, I guess, more his thing. All right. After World War I or during World War I or around that period of the Weimar, there was a period of German painters, and the section is called German Expressionism. And the paintings here are emotion. That's basically what they're trying to capture. It's not so much what the objects are. And the most famous of these paintings, which I think is the perfect painting for the Age of Anxiety, it's right here. Good. Isn't that perfect? That should be like the cover of every Kafka novel, by the way. It's like, oh! Okay. So what's scream? I mean, if he's trying to paint emotion, what is the emotion?
Terror.
Fear.
Anxiety.
Frustration, anger, whatever.
Confusion.
Puberty, clearly, what is the emotion?
Anxiety, confusion.
Anxiety, bashfulness, shame. My favorite Munch is this one. And I think this is also in the Museum of Modern Art, or at least maybe it was exhibited, but it's called The Dance of Life. And the painting itself, if you look at the three women are the same woman. Okay? The woman in white represents innocence. The woman in the middle is sort of like the period where the woman is kind of like having fun and living her life. Maybe a little bit, seedy or whatever the case may be, maybe a little bit more courageous. And the woman in black is the woman that has aged and no longer has that part of her life. So it's kind of taking like three stages of womanhood and kind of combining them into the scene, which is pretty intense stuff, actually. The Dance of Life. And then this weird guy in the back, like, dance with me, dance with me. Okay. A couple of other painters that were in this group. These are lesser known. I would be happy if you just remembered the screen. Hang on a second. Clear. I know this is a lot. So, come on. We can do that.
Taking a break? Yeah,
Taking a break is going to happen in about 20 minutes. Okay?
Okay. Well, that would be actually cutting it really close with this.
Well, how much time do we have?
About 22 minutes.
All right, perfect. Let's go. So the other guy was Ernest Kirchner. There's nothing really spectacular about it. More than maybe the expression itself is to show you how weird Berlin was during the Weimar period. It was considered maybe one of the most avant-garde places in the world. Hitler hated everything about Weimar Germany, but particularly the art, which he just thought was like, it looks like True Blood or something like that, one of the bars in True Blood. But very kind of, androgynous, very jazzy. But that would be a scene in Berlin.
That was clearly Cubism.
Portrait of Emmy.
Seems like you did not like me.
Mr. Clemens, who was the artist that painted the screen?
Edvard Munch.
Munch.
Spelled Munch. This is another figure. His name is George Rouault, which is kind of a different take on the old Renaissance, Christ on the cross type of thing. A little bit more abstract. But he took religious themes and then he kind of added his own little modern spin to it.
Who is that?
His name is George Rouault, R-O-U-A-U-L-T. But this is part of that German school or German Expressionism. All right, we only have a couple of more movements and I want to talk about them. And the one is Cubism, which I think everybody pretty much identifies Picasso, and that's pretty much all you have to do. All right, Cubism itself was sort of a style of painting where they tried to paint multiple dimensions of the same figures at the same time, which created some very disjointed looking things. This is his probably second most famous painting. It's called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. The other painting is the one that's above my door. It's called Guernica, which was a rendering of an aerial bombardment of a Spanish town during the Civil War. I don't know if I have a copy of it, but very, very strange looking art. I've never really quite got it, but Cubism was really, really popular in the 20s and 30s.
Don't worry, I don't get it either.
And he had different periods. They talk about this blue period that he had. I forgot what the other one was, like a rose period, where he was a very good painter. But this stuff I never quite understood why it was cool. But very, very abstract.
When I went to Spain, I saw one of those pieces that I did with German. I I think it's that.
This is his version of a still life.
Oh, it's big too.
Okay, and then George Braque,
Is that a piano or a guitar?
guitar.
Okay.
Usually identified with Spain.
Yeah, that's what
That was his way of showing like an homage to Spain would have a guitar in the band. All right, and then George Braque was the other figure. He messed around a little bit with like incorporating newspaper clippings into the art, which is a different version of Cubism. Like I said, things get kind of weird after that. Abstract Expressionism, and there's a handful of people that fall into that category. One of them is Kandinsky, and his paintings are close to just that. There's not really anything in it. I think you can make out like an eyelash, maybe.
Was Dali in this group?
No, Dali's part of what's called surrealism.
Oh.
And there's a couple of people that fall into that category. But Kandinsky was just this, a lot of, just different colors, different objects, different dimensions. This one's just called Improvisation number 28. Which, I mean, it's cool, I guess. This is a clown's head exploding.
Do we know that for sure?
No, but that's, kind of pick what you want and make out of art whatever it is you want to make out of art. And this is watching a clown combust.
Composition number 7. I would put that in my house.
What?
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
It belongs in a gallery. It doesn't belong in somebody's wall in their house.
I put that on the wall.
Would you?
Those like Miami people.
That's for Miami people. That's right. A blue horse.
I wouldn't put that on the wall.
I'd put a blue horse. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Marc Chagall. I don't have a lot of stuff on here from Chagall, but Chagall was pretty prolific in this period. Ooh. Woman with a bouquet of flowers.
That is a yellow room.
Oh, it's out there, man.
What? What? What?
You got the phallic teapot. You got the upside down head.
Are
You
they
got
in
the nameless,
space?
faceless man looking out at the sky. The moon has a snout.
That is a cow.
All right. So, like I said, things are starting to go off the deep end here. Dada, which we talked about in class. Simran, what was the name of our pancake artist?
Oh, Dan Lucy.
Dan Lucy?
Yeah. Lacey.
Lacey.
Yeah, Dan Lacey.
That's it. Yeah, fourth period discovered a guy that paints pancakes on people's heads.
I'll put it on.
I could have
All right.
Look it up on your iPads. I'll put it on the video.
Yeah, there's a whole section in Dada that is in your book that discusses just like the movement itself and what it stood for. This is like the theater of the absurd. Basically, this is a movement that was created when a bunch of people wanted to name their movement and decided to stick a pen into the dictionary. And they said, well, what do you want to call our movement? They were like, Dada, which means hobby horse. So then all of these astute, art critics would then be like, Dada, very, very interesting. What is it that you hope to accomplish with your movement? And they kind of said, well, we kind of think everything is absurd. And we want art to reflect how random and stupid everything is. So Marcel Duchamp, who you can see is a very good artist, eventually kind of joins this group. This is called Nude Descending a Staircase.
What?
But his most famous painting, which I don't have, his most famous painting is the mustache on the Mona Lisa. He literally just painted, let me show you. Oh, I don't have the ability to show you, do I?
Hang on, I can show
Hang on.
you too.
Sure, you show us about it.
There we go. So we'll go to Marcel Duchamp. So this is part of the movement, but you had
Was it like a handlebar mustache?
A dolly's mustache?
oh, there it is. I don't know if that can get any more. There she is. And apparently, I mean, I don't know what the French part of it is, but it's supposed to be some kind of obscenity, and it just says LHOOQ at the bottom. But I think if you pronounce it in some way, it's like some kind of profane statement or saying or something like that. Basically, like sort of like screw you, and it's defacing. I mean, the whole point of it was to deface what was regarded as the most famous portrait ever rendered in art. And he was like, "The hell with it. We'll put little, devil horns on it and put a little mustache on her."
She also has a goatee.
And the other one was this, which was a sculpture, and he called it the fountain. So literally all he's doing is taking a urinal and then exhibiting it as a sculpture. And what he did was he unhosed a urinal from a bathroom and then submitted it and called it the fountain. So that art critics could go and go, oh yes, refuse. What is he, it was like, he could have, oh, here's another one. Upside down bicycle wheel in a stool. And that's what Dada was. Dada was literally just making fun of art.
I feel like this guy is like the father of modern art, and that's not a good thing.
No, I mean, and this movement more than anything else, I think, represents just how, like Albert Camus as an author was trying to point out just the randomness, the absurdity of most things, and how even art itself, if it is a reflection of society, and if society is random and absurd, then they wanted their art movement to kind of reflect that. I had this other thing, which was a clip. So it was the oddest thing, but this guy named Hugo Ball had published this weird, here's a picture of him. All right.
Can you move it to the center?
Yeah.
Wait.
I don't know if I can or not. I guess not.
Oh well.
But anyway, I came across this, and this is like his poem. And he would give this just insane poem that made no sense, and it was just like gibberish words. But somehow, they got Marie Osmond from the Osmonds, and I don't know if you remember them. They were like, Donnie and Marie were like this big brother-sister act in the 1970s. But they got Marie Osmond to perform Hugo Ball's Caruani. This is what it sounds like. Hang on.
Malala, ang logo bang, basta putaka, Shamba uban wata. Ang logo bang, basta putaka, Shamba uban wata.
Let's try it again.
Wata.
What's up? Yeah, this is the mixtape.
Kalbani Johnny Santo, Blanga o Farihamba. Hai Globo Aikora Sula Huji, Holaka Holala, and Logo Bang, Basta Putaka, Shamba Uban Wata. And Logo Bang, Basta Putaka, Shamba Uban Wata.
What?
What?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, man.
That's Dada.
Okay? So Marcel Duchamp and a handful of others. There's this guy named Zara, T-C-A-R-A. And this weirdo by the name of Hugo Ball, who like goes to poetry readings and that's what he recites. And so you have like your poet people that are hanging out doing them.
Oh my God, what is he?
Here's a quote. This is in your textbook. It says, "Art in its execution and direction is dependent on the time in which it lives, and artists are creatures of their epoch. The highest art will be that which in its conscious content presents the thousandfold problems of the day. The art which has been visibly shattered by the explosions of last week, which is forever trying to collect its limbs after yesterday's crash. Dada is the international expression of our times, the great rebellion of artistic movements, the artistic reflex of all those offensives, peace congresses, riots in the vegetable market. Blast the bloodless abstraction of Expressionism. Blast the literary hollowheads and their theories for improvising the world. To be against this manifesto is to be a Dadaist." It sounds like hipsters. Like anything that's not, yeah, it's trying to make cool out of things that are not cool.
They are hipsters.
They are hipsters. Okay? So the last movement then is in your notes.
Actually,
Yeah, the last movement then is Surrealism. And this is where we got to the pancake guy. But we're going to take a break right after this. Rene Magritte. Remember Pancake Eyeball Guy? Alright. So, Surrealism, which is Salvador Dali, and there's a painting of Salvador Dali kind of showing, I think it was Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection and then drowned in a pool. That he did a rendering of that, what it would look like in his like weird dream state, or skate, or however you say escape, I guess it is. But yeah, I mean, you're sitting, you're having breakfast, and then your freaking pancake is staring back at you. That's a dream. And that's kind of what Surrealism was supposed to be, is to take like the unconscious activity of the brain and then try to portray that in art. So, this is a portrait of a pancake.
Wait, is that a bottle of wine?
It's a bottle of wine, yeah.
Why would you drink wine with pancakes?
It's France.
Hang on, this is important.
But wouldn't that scare the hell out of you if you were having breakfast?
It scares the hell out of me now.
Cat with a pancake on its head. Okay, what about the same person painted a football on a pancake?
This was a sculpture. The king playing with the queen.
Oh, I get it.
There's the king.
How'd you get it?
Yeah, I get it.
He's playing with the queen on the chessboard.
Alright. Salvador Dali, I think most people have seen this one before.
Oh, is it the melting clocks?
Yeah. Okay, the persistence of memory.
That is just so weird.
This one, this is the guy that scares me. His name is Chirico. Anywhere in these paintings, and he shows these really like grandiose monument kind of buildings, and really playing with shadows or sunsets. And there's always like an object, like a figure, somewhere in these paintings.
Where's it in this one? Okay.
I'm not sure. You have to look. But those are his paintings. Chirico's are these just gigantic structures. And then if you look, do this, but it's right,
fine.
It's right here.
What is that?
Hang on, let me
There's
zoom
always
in.
like a guy.
Let me zoom
This
in.
nameless, faceless guy that is always in these paintings.
Slender Man.
It's not
It's the Slenderman.
It's definitely Slenderman.
Slenderman?
Yeah, Slenderman.
Okay. I'll buy that.
Yep.
Alright, so there's Chirico. There it is. You can see him closer now.
That's really disquieting.
It even says that.
Oh, okay.
I never heard anybody use the word disquieting and then have it show up on the screen as
Leave it to Celine.
the disquieting muses.
I'm good at this.
Okay. I have one more thing then and we can end the art section, and that is I don't know if anybody's ever seen this, and it's a shame like Francesca and some of my theater people are not here, but
We have
Alban Berg And music itself, and it refers to Igor Stravinsky, and it refers to Alvin Berg, Arnold Schoenberg, that literally music itself was sort of thrown up in the air. And there was a lot of these just very, very weird, absurd performances, and music which was supposed to have, you know, like some melody and some composition. It was like they were taking the tones in the music and then kind of throwing them up in the air, and wherever they came down, that's sort of how they would create their music. So this is one portion of it from this very famous work called Wozzeck.
Wozzeck.
Well, listen to the music.
Du sollst arbeiten, Marie, komm, setz dich. Bist du weit gegangen, Marie, sonst dir die Füße nicht mehr.
After the time when they did these performances, people were like, what the hell's going on? Yeah. Or they had one where it was like a ballet, but then everybody started like taking their clothes off, and it was freaking the people out. They called it the Rite of Spring.
What?
Yeah. So all these like serious theater-going people are dealing with this just very weird music.
I feel like that's one step short of like drawing a pentagram on the floor.
Pretty close.
It's like sacrificing nature.
Or sacrificing something on stage. But, this Schoenberg is what they call atonality. And if you listen to it, it sounds like the soundtrack to a horror film or something like that. Where it's like, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. But here's a portion. It's like taking, I don't know, like Beethoven or Bach or something, and like sticking your little finger up it.
Like this is like
odd scenes.
This is like a movie soundtrack.
You know, like Rasputin from the future.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, listening to a couple hours of that would be a real treat.
Anyways,
All right, that's all I got for a few minutes. Let's take a little break.